If you're getting up in the dark, can you make the roll call, please?
Mr. Lennox,
Here.
Ms. Becker,
Here.
Mr. Ames,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Stanford,
Here.
Mayor, and Mr. Harkins is expected.
Expected?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are.
Could you please join me in a pledge of allegiance? Thank you. Pledge allegiance. We have several items on today's agenda, and the first one on housing will be us talking about the framework for housing. It will be limited to a half an hour, because the main part of today's meeting had started to be and will end up being about the park. Now, David looked at me and he said it's not going to be a half hour. It'll be a little more than a half an hour. We had our retreat last week, and with great consensus, everybody on the council agreed that one of our top items was housing. Was housing expanded to be housing, transportation, benefits, and a whole load of other stuff. We also talked about how the town manager ought to be building a framework for us so we can talk about housing and implement a plan and have a plan ready for November 1 on the housing part of it. After a great deal of talk with some council members and the town manager, it's not the town manager's job to lay this plan out. It's the job of the council to lay out the framework for this plan. It is the job of the town manager to implement what the council lays out as the framework for the plan. And with that, I'd like to start with the main items that we're going to discuss with the plan. You can expand this plan as far as you want in your mind to talk about housing and to talk about homelessness and everything, but let's stay focused on what we can do by that November 1 date. There are two things that are really, really important with this program. One is that we believe in it, and I think the council is unanimous that we believe in housing. Two is the structure we set up to implement the housing, whether it be a housing authority or whatever. And the third is the financing part of it. We've got the greatest plan in the world. We have no money. We have no means of getting money. Nothing is ever going to happen. And the fourth, and probably just as important as the top two, is that we need public buy-in. We want the public to be involved in this decision, not a handful of groups like we did before, but the whole island. We need to work out a program where the whole island is touched by this plan moving forward. We need to consider having a referendum as part of the financing so the island can vote, so the residents here can vote. It's where we are spending their money. And if almost 40,000 people live here should vote on how we're going to spend that money. So it's important we decide the financing of it. But if you look at the plan itself, in the next 6-7 weeks, by November 1, we are looking to present the public and the town manager with a plan that we would like him to implement along the way. Really. Now, I'd like to start off with the management of the plan. We got the greatest plan in the world, but we need someone to manage it. And there's no one in this room that's going to manage the plan. We are not looking for our consultants to manage a plan. We're looking for their advice and suggestions. We are probably looking at going out and hiring somebody to manage the plan once we decide what it is. So there's a lot of groundwork to be done in the next 5 or 6 weeks. So the options on the management of it is, David, why don't you touch on some of the options for management of the plan?
I think that there are probably 3 different directions to head. One is where the town sponsors a housing authority. There is the Beaufort County Housing Authority at this time, which also is an option. The second is to hire an outside third-party management firm that does this on a regular basis. And the fourth would be to try to do it in-house, or the third would be in-house. I think from my standpoint, it's incredibly important that the plan, the framework, acknowledge that the survivability, the sustainability of a community housing program depends on the ability of the town/organization to maintain the affordability within projects that are developed. So it doesn't serve our purposes to have a workforce affordable housing program that in a number of years expires. We're facing that today, complicated by short-term rentals, but we're facing that today as developers recognize an economic opportunity to take an existing housing project and change it into something other than what has traditionally been workforce housing. So I think whatever we come up with, we have to acknowledge that the sustainability, the retention of affordability is key to our success.
Thomas, your thoughts?
I'll reserve them for a while.
Reserve them for a while.
Yeah.
Wow. Tammy, you're not going to reserve anything, right?
No, actually, I am. Thank you. I'm going to do some listening first. Thank you.
Well, for our return on our investment, Bill, what do you think?
Well, three things. First, the acknowledgement in a very respectful way that we don't have the expertise within the walls of the town hall. Second, this is going to require three things. It's going to require experience, expertise, and access to capital. And access to capital won't be available without the first two. So I would respectfully submit that we go out to some proven players, see if we like them, if there's good chemistry, good competence, and pick somebody to run with. Otherwise, we're going to be dilly-dallying about for another year.
Mr. Glenn?
We frequently hear criticism of the town hiring too many outside consultants. I don't like to hear those comments because, first of all, we acknowledge that we are not experts in all things. And I agree with my colleagues here who have said that we do not have expertise in management of a program like this. And so I think the idea of finding an expert to manage this for us is going to be vital to its success. And I, for one, am willing to face whatever heat we receive from our citizenry about that, because it is vital to the continued health of this community that we deal with this housing issue. I have comments on the funding and housing trust, and do you want to wait on
Go
those?
back. I want to
Okay,
slide down one thing at a time.
right.
Alex,
Are you looking for me to,
looking for your comments on our executive director or whatever it is to manage the plan.
okay, perfect. I agree that we don't currently have the staff capacity to manage such a plan. So I would be in favor of us hiring someone. I'm not quite sure that we want it to be an outside agency, because I see this opportunity flowing from the framework to November 1st, from there to budget, and from there we continue it because this housing crisis that we're in is not going to go away within a year's time, even 2 years' time. It's going to be a continuum. So in my mind, I think we need to have boots on the ground that continue to manage this program, and at some point it can be handed off to housing authority or such. But at the moment, the need is so grave that I'm inclined that we have someone here all the time working on it.
The consensus, Tom, you finish your reserve?
Well, I think when you talk about management, we're talking about management of the overall town-sponsored plan. I think that can be accommodated internally and made a part of a strategy in support of the town strategic plan. That aside, there's another side of management, and that would be project management. And we've got one coming off the drawing board to really test in the form of a public-private partnership. And I think we all agreed as we started the review of the responses to the RFQ, and we'll probably talk about more when we see the responses to the RFP. One of the elements in determining a partner was their ability to manage the project during construction and post-construction. So I think we've got two different elements of the idea of management. One as it pertains to a town-sponsored plan about housing, and secondly, project management, pre-construction and post-construction of individual projects like North Point.
You in favor of a housing authority? And why or why not?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough
Well, I
information.
think that Tom's an advocate one way or the other, working with the,
I think Tom brings up a very important point.
If I may, before you start there, though, I get my chance.
yes, you do.
Thank you. First, I'm not sure what type of project or program we are looking to find a management scheme to work with. So to me, I think some of that plays into what it is that we're planning on thinking this through here. Secondly, the idea of having someone in-house to manage a program, housing program, to me seems to be drifting away from our limited government that Hilton Head enjoys. And so each step that we take away from that limited government philosophy, in my mind, will be the wrong direction. So I'd like to hear more about what it is that folks are thinking of. As I was listening to you, Mayor, you had a number of comments that we also haven't considered. For as long as I've known us as a body, from the beginning, we talked about transportation. I still think, and I'm sure that others might as well, think that transportation is a critical element that we've yet to explore, find ways to implement something that could be meaningful. And so I'd like to see more discussion about management of a transportation program. I'd like to hear more about what type of program we're managing. Is this all buy land, build a house, or build a building and slot people into them? What's next for those folks when they no longer fit into the affordability of those public housing situation? Will their dollars then put them in a position where they can buy on Hilton Head? Likely not. So where do they go? I'd like to see more opportunities for ownership through Habitat for Humanity. They manage that really well. Short-term rental you mentioned. We're in the midst of developing ideas and concepts for where we go with short-term rentals next. I've heard a number of different ideas. Some of them are worth exploring. They may have impacts in terms of how we're looking at workforce housing. There's the idea that we have, and we do, with respect to those who are on our island through the Sheriff's Department, provide a stipend. Is that something yet to expand and discuss? So when we start talking about what kind of management program we need, I think we need to talk about what it is we're doing and what elements are we overlooking before we jump into one singular idea. Thank you.
You should talk today as to how you think we should resolve those items that you brought up. Past the point of having questions, we're at the point of what are the answers to the questions.
I'm more than happy to discuss.
I agree with you from the very beginning, but it doesn't fit into what's being done between now and November 1.
Well, that in and of itself, with all due respect, the November 1st deadline coming out of a strategic plan only a week ago, you never make a mistake by taking a longer time to come to a decision. And it seems to me that every time you don't do that, you are inherently lining yourself up for consequence after consequence after consequence that wasn't contemplated, wasn't researched, thought through, and then decided on. So the November 1st date is artificial, and I think that should be reconsidered.
Well, that's not always true, because 4 years ago, we talked about housing. 4 years ago, we talked about housing and transportation, and it's 4 years later, and we haven't done anything. Some kind of a date and work towards those dates, even if you gotta move them. It's a date that you can see. It isn't something that will be done later on.
But we haven't talked about transportation, and while we may have a small group here that appeals to a certain idea, there's a larger, almost 40,000 member resident base in Hilton Head, and we have yet to hear from them. And so, with regard to that, I think that your idea of a referendum is appropriate and necessary.
David, you want to say?
Yeah, I think Tom brought up a very important point, and that is the differences of management that we're talking about. The one I was referring to was the strategic or overarching management of a program that has the responsibility of implementing housing on this island, not the project management that Tom also referred to. And so I think that the overarching responsibility on a long-term basis for the retention of housing has to be more than staff-driven. I think it has to be something that can, on a daily basis, perceive opportunity in the community before it has already passed. And then secondly, receive funds from any number of sources and direct them to specific projects that it has determined have the greatest viability to benefit the community. And it's the community that we're talking about here. It isn't just economic development that we're talking about. It isn't just workforce housing. It's creating a place for people to live and grow within the community. And, you know, there are so many examples of community leadership today who came up through workforce housing and progressed through this community. And that's the kind of community building that this program ought to have as a basis. It's not just economic development. Workforce housing is incredibly important. But the true benefit is that you create places for people to live and grow within the community. And so that's why I am leaping ahead without enough information to say that a strong organization has to be able to deal with the money, the planning, the opportunities, and the implementation. Thank you.
Glenn?
I want to react to the comment that was made that we haven't done anything in 4 years. About 4 years ago, we hired a housing consultant who had national expertise in workforce housing. We listened to that consultant. Certain recommendations were made. We adopted those recommendations into law, and they didn't work. So we have been working hard to try to find the right formula, and that was not the right formula. Our town manager told me early on in his career with us that bonus density doesn't work. Well, it sounds like theoretically it would work, but it didn't. And so now we have hit on this concept of the public-private partnership, which I'm very enthusiastic about. And I think we may be on the road to success with that. On a totally different subject, I see negative baggage with the concept of a housing authority. Housing authority tends to carry with it the concept of Section 8 housing and warehousing people. That's not what we're about here. And so I hope we can find some terminology that is not associated with housing authorities. So I look forward to this. I appreciate the challenge you put before us, John, and I will work to try to get it done as you've asked us to do by November the 1st. Thank you.
What would you like to do? If you could say, I want to do this first or second, what would you like to do?
With regard to management,
No, the whole process here, the management, the education.
I think we need to decide the sources of funding for this first. I think that there is appeal to a referendum, and we may want to consider that. I mentioned at our previous meeting that I see an opportunity in some funds that are available to us through ARPA and the county where we could seed our own local housing trust fund. I am concerned about the idea of a regional trust fund because I don't see Hilton Head Island ever qualifying for those funds. At one point, I suggested that no community should get a second project through the regional trust fund until all communities had benefited from the trust fund, and that was rejected. And that was rejected because a lot of those other communities say, Hilton Head is rich, let them take care of themselves, we need to take care of ourselves. Or at least that's my perception of it in any event. So I think that we're on the right road right now, and that we are looking at consultants to help us with a public-private partnership. We need to have a serious debate about whether we want to have a referendum or not, and if not, how we would secure the funding. But to me, starting with a local trust fund, which could be funded with $500,000 that the town is due from the county, makes sense as a first step. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I want to react to the discussion that we're having at the moment, and start with your comment, Mr. Mayor, as to what we've done over the last 4 years. Councilman Stanford's right. We hired an expert to come in and give us some recommendations, one of which was that we start a funding source. Let's just do a little math here, okay? We can, as a municipality, implement a 1 mil on our property tax. If we had done that 4 years ago, we would have had $4 million in the bank to have a discussion around. That 1 mil, just so that it's relative to us, with a population of about 40,000, I don't know, what's that, like $25 for the year on our property tax bill? We probably spent that this morning at Starbucks trying to wake up. The only way we're going to move forward is if we have funding to assist with the program. And I don't know what that funding looks like in terms of how we spend it at the moment, but we got to have money in order to make it happen. Referendum idea, sure, we can explore that. But at this point, I would ask that we employ the town manager to at least, within his framework, give us some ideas of what this may cost. I mean, the survey report said that we needed 2,000 units. Well, I don't know what the going rate per unit is today, but let's put that in the framework. How many acres is it going to take us to get to that unit count? That could be in the framework. Some ideas as to how much it's going to cost us to have a housing authority on the side could be in the framework. But give us some numbers to react to versus us reacting to it emotionally. And I think that's where we are at the moment. So I just wanted to offer that as part of the framework discussion.
Mayor? I think it's important for us to understand that the burden of this doesn't rest 100% on the local population. Yes, I think it's important for this community to recognize that we have a serious problem that we have to solve as a community. So yes, I think the community has to step up and pay. But there are other sources of local, county, state, and federal dollars that can be put into the pie. There are foundations, there are corporations, there is the contribution of tourists through hospitality tax that opens up opportunities. So I think that solving the problem from a funding source, we first have to recognize that there are a number of layers that are available to us. But who's going to deal with that on a daily basis? That's why I go towards some kind of an organization that has its responsibility to ferret out those opportunities and to go for them. And I don't know if housing authority is the wrong term or not, Glenn, but it is a management organization that is committed to implementing the program.
Mayor, if I could pick up on a couple of things, please.
Sure.
Thank you. The comment over the last 4 years, and what, Glenn, I want to add to what you had to say, that we have current examples of successes that were able to take place because of some of the pieces that the town helped to put together. At the Beaufort County Council meeting just Monday night, there was proclamations that were provided. J.R. Richardson and his lovely wife received one. Ed Flynn did not receive one, but Ed Flynn has done the same sort of development over off of Marshland Road. Sea Pines has done a similar type of program. We have Health and Wellness Center spending $3 million of their money to provide workforce housing for employees. And if I return back to the first, it was my understanding that evening that there's additional properties that are being utilized on the island and redeveloped for workforce housing through that private sector. It indeed is working. It may have taken a while, but it indeed is working. And I think encouraging additional programs like that to grab hold, be developed, is something that we really should not short sell, that we ought to praise them, encourage additional projects like that to take place, and to see what happens with that. I also want to acknowledge another comment that was made. $25 may not seem a lot to those folks in this room, but $25 on everyone's tax bill, not just the rich and famous, does mean something. Not everybody goes to Starbucks in the morning and drops $25 without thinking of it. Every dollar that every person has is important to them. And that's something we may not take for granted. And then there was one last thing that I wanted to pick up on with regard to community. Those who have listened to me talk about this before, and just last week at the strategic plan knows, one of my biggest issues with housing as we're barreling down the road on is that we're not planning for community, and that we're not taking into consideration the people who, and I thought I referenced this as I was talking about, then what? When you've gotten to a place where those affordable homes, you've exceeded that, and you've grown, and you've built a depth of wealth, and you want your family to have the next step in life here of the American dream. Then what? But that's where we're focused at. That's where I'm focused at, is that type of community that builds those opportunities. And we're not going to provide that with a lot of apartment-style rentals where people go, they drop their heads at night, they wake up in the morning, and they come out and they serve us, and they clean our homes, and they cut our grass, and they teach our children. We can do better than that if we're going to do something. And I'll mention, because it is one of my favorite programs, Habitat for Humanity. Thank you.
What would you suggest that we do?
What would I suggest that we do? I think that we should continue down the road that we have, find different ways to bring in additional private resources to build and to provide, that we look where we can to help support home ownership, and that we look seriously at the opportunities for transportation. Transportation may solve a couple of problems for us, right? It may solve the problem of a park and ride on the other side of the bridge somewhere and reduce the traffic on our 278 corridor. Wouldn't that be a blessing? And not very expensive either. So there are a number of things. We're not going to solve it all here in this meeting, but every time throughout the years of my working with everyone, I've asked for opportunities like this where we could drop ideas in the center of the table and brainstorm, and then sort it out and think it through, and maybe come up with a different idea, because within there, you're going to find a good answer. I don't have it for you this second, but I have lots of ideas.
Thomas?
John, I think the way David described the development, implementation, and management of an affordable housing program last week makes a lot of sense. I like everything about the way he's described that. I think we can build it into the town plan and find an effective way to management. The November 1st date, however, bothers me, and I'll tell you why. If you recall, reviewing the responses to the RFQs, there was a lot in those responses that I had never heard about as it pertains to developing and managing affordable housing. And that's real good information. And I think the way the RFP was written and issued, it's going to refine that even more. And I anticipate we're going to get a lot of good information as it pertains to the development and management of affordable housing. I would assume that some of those ideas can be incorporated into what David described last week. So I think we're getting out over our skis a little bit in clearly defining that November 1st date. I personally would rather wait until we get whatever responses we get from the RFP and glean the ideas out of there and see how they fit Hilton Head Island and our needs, and see how they fit the needs of us as the public partner and the developer that we ultimately choose as the private partner. To do something right now might be a shortcut to what we might see in the responses and the interviews with potential developers.
Let me approach it a different way, okay? It seems that one of the most equally important items on the list is education. If anything, we could start now putting together an educational vehicle as to whatever we decide to do, be able to get the education out there.
John, we sat in here in March in this same configuration, and Mark described what was a brand new concept in the history of the town, and that is doing a public-private partnership where we have land assets and we have $1 million in the budget allocated in some way for the housing effort. And ever since that, there has been continuing communication with the community and education, I think, and there has been acceptance all the way. So I think the community is ready, and I think the movement and the momentum we have with this project, when do we get the responses? By the first week of October? Yes, sir. We're not that far away. And that information is going to be enormously valuable in the development of David's plan.
Bill?
Thank you. I think first, I think we have to stand tall as a council and have a vote that we do have a problem. Number one. And I'm trying to give you tangible, you're asking for something tangible. So
Yes, I am, sir.
Second is, I think we have to put some metrics out there. What's the size of the problem? And then realistically, what % of the problem are we going to target? So we start creating a goal with some accountability. Community education, I think, is critical. I mentioned at the last meeting, and I think it's still true, yes, there are a lot of people that are supportive, probably a lot of people in this room here in the audience, but there could be an equal number of people not in the room that are saying, not in my backyard. And I think the key message in education is that, yes, there is a economic benefit for taking action, but there's also an economic penalty for not taking action. So that should be the essence of the educational program. I think, I said earlier, work with a public-private model and bring in people with experience and expertise. I still stand by that. That said, I think it's important to have some boots on the ground with one person here that can keep managing. So I think Tom articulated that well. I think we should now, with lessons learned, we should be able to glean, I think, the salient points that are that we're learning from this post office project, I call it. And then with that information, go out into the marketplace and ask for people, again, that have the experience, the expertise, and the access to capital. And then in terms of sources, there's operating, you need money for operations, for an ongoing concern, and you need money for capital. So what can we do there? We have land, not a huge amount, but we do have land available. We can monetize that and become a partner in a public-private partnership. And when I say monetize that, we may not go to market rate because that may come up with accounting consequences that make this a no-go situation. So if we start using some of our land below market value, it's very important not to do an accounting analysis. It's very important to do an economic analysis. And that economic analysis is clear that workforce housing can do two things. It can help people maintain their job, and it also may create an opportunity for someone that doesn't have a job to get a job. Very important. I think in terms of sources of funds, capital and operating, again, I think land is the first bucket. We monetize that. Second, a 1% tax, as we were talking about. If we did that, the comment was made that we could have $4 million in the piggy bank.
1 mil.
Pardon?
1 mil.
Right, 1 mil for 1 mil equals 1 million. If we did it for 4 years, it'd be 4 million. But it goes well beyond that. And I'm looking at Tom as the banker. But if you have a predictable revenue stream, you can do a multiple on that. And Tom, what would you say the multiple would be on that?
It depends on how long the tax or the mill is on. If 1 mil was on 25 years, is John Troyer in the room? You could bond that at 20 million.
Sure, right. And you can do that, again, tangible things to do now. That's there. Then the other comment, the other bucket would be of sort of a potpourri, public foundations, other governmental opportunities. And in the biggest is going to be private capital. And private capital, unless we have a circle around all of these sources of funds, then private capital is going to push back and say, this is too risky. But if we get this organized, like I'm saying, private capital is not going to go.
And that's why North Point is so extremely important. We can't mess North Point up. If that is a success, that word will spread nationwide.
Alex?
I want to run through my list because you asked the questions as to direction, okay? But before I do so, I'm still in favor of the 1st of November deadline, simply because Councilman Lincoln is right. We've got this public-private partnership deal on the table, but things continue to happen. I mean, Chimney Cove was the reason that we're here today, all right? So there are going to be other opportunities, threats within our realm that we're not prepared for at the moment, and unless we put some stuff in our toolbox, we'll be caught with our pants down again, okay? So I'm in favor of that. So funding, the whole idea of management versus the town internally and outside with projects, you know, us figuring if a housing authority makes sense. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, as far as the communication is concerned. And again, not just emotional communication, but to Councilman Hawkins' point, metrics that we can get our arms and heads wrapped around as far as the threat through our community. Our level of service here on Hilton Head affects our brand, and it starts to deteriorate daily because of our lack of a qualified workforce moving forward. And the last is, you know, staff capacity. You know, Mr. Orlando has done such a great job with putting us in a position where we are referring to our strat plan all the time, okay? And quite frankly, when we vote on ordinances that are coming out of that strat plan, we don't have this type of crowd. Why? Because we already know that we need to do those things, and we've got a plan to do them. And I want to get to the point where we don't have to have folks in the crowd pressuring us to move forward with housing. The only way we do that is we put a stake in the ground and say, hey, let's put a framework together so we can move forward on this. And the last thing I'll say, I'm a little concerned with Councilwoman Becker's reference to building community through housing, because the one developer that she left out was Mr. Barnwell that got a proclamation on Monday also.
My apologies, that is right.
But the point is,
Sorry.
Mr. Barnwell's development is the only one that goes in the direction that she describes as far as building community. It's not a J1 visa development. It is an opportunity for folks to come in, start up, and move on. And I'd also add that it's the only one that the owner visits every morning because he's interested in building community.
Before I go to, I'm sorry, Mark.
I'm done.
You can be brief?
Yeah. I don't think we should do a referendum.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying that is that, you know, we get the big bucks to try to listen to the community, to observe, to analyze, and to come up with recommendations. That said, we can't be dismissive about the community. We need to roll up our sleeves and have a real sound educational program so that everyone in the community can come up to our level of understanding and hopefully even go beyond that. But I view a referendum as a slowdown, and unwittingly so, a slowdown measure.
All right, thank you, Alex. Please. And I think exactly different than Bill. I think the community should have an opportunity to vote their money. They should have an opportunity to say up or down. It shouldn't be the 7 people at this table and some influences to tell them what to do. This is community money. This is a big number. This is something that will go on for a long, long time. We underestimate the community we have here. And a referendum brings more people to the table than all the meetings we could have otherwise. And a referendum doesn't have to be on an election day. It could be January 15th of next year. There's no lock into November. David?
Yeah, Mayor, I appreciate the comment. I think, although I may side with Mr. Harkins' direction, I think it's premature for us to know what is going to be necessary. It may be necessary to have both. We don't know today. But I will say, from my own personal standpoint, that housing is so critical to this island that the 7 of us have to come to grips with how we're going to solve that problem. And if that says that we need 1 mil to be dedicated to housing, then I think we take that step and lead.
Mayor, can I have 2 things, just really quickly. We're well over our 30 minutes, but, so I'm going to take my 2 minutes. First of all, Mr. Barnwell, my deepest apology. Yeah, I know that your family was there, and I just didn't have it clear on my notes. There's lots of things I just scribbled down, and I lost track. Mr. Barnwell is also, as Alex mentioned, been in the housing market, doing good work on the island for many, many years. So I wanted to appreciate him and his efforts. But in terms of the referendum, non-referendum, John, you're right. Everyone on this island should have a voice. And if we have a table of singular thought, then not everyone has a voice. And so a referendum out to the community is the appropriate way to get there. Thank you.
Mr. Orlando, comments?
Well, I'm taking it all in. What is it, last Thursday? Today's Wednesday. You all asked at the strategic plan workshop for a framework. And since then, I've been trying to wrap my head around it. And I think that this discussion helps a lot, right? So how do I take all of this information and bring you back what you're asking me to do? And so far, I don't want to put words in anyone's place, but if you'd like a framework by November 1, clarity when I leave today is essential. I heard a word, and I think that that's what's missing. Yeah, the strategic plan is something that's important to us. It stops everybody wondering what business we're in, right? I always say, if you want to be in the business, get in the business. You want to be in housing, hire someone that knows housing. You want to be in planning, engineering, capital projects, hire someone that knows what they're doing, and that when I'm back at my desk trying to do my best to be a town manager, that work's being done. And so I think that's important. But what might be missing is getting organized, right? I think that we're doing one thing in the North Point Housing Partnership, and I believe we're doing it well. Is it fast enough? Never. Because I know this, and I think we can all agree, we can't build our way out of this. And if we need 2,000 units, start today, by the time we get there, we'll never build our way out of it. So what I really focus on is that housing continuum. I heard today to go from here to there, right? To go from one unit, Mr. Barnwell's, stabilize your life, stabilize your family, live with a high quality of life, wave to Mr. Barnwell every morning, make sure your site's in great shape, and then move on. And so I think what we're talking a little bit about is opportunity. I always get back to that we need to provide housing options for local employees, whether it's on this side of the bridge, the other side of the bridge, whatnot. But options for local employees is vital to our economy and to our community. There's a lot of ways to get there, but in a framework, if it's by November 1st, I think that it's just getting organized and maybe giving some options. What's the menu? What's the menu to decide upon in the future, knowing that we need to pick sooner than later some of those early priorities? And that's your will, right? I want to ask more questions than have solutions, but I know that a framework would provide incentives, right? What are they? Are they buy downs? Are they land banks? Are they zoning, density? I said density bonuses don't work. The way our density bonus is, it's limited, it's only in certain areas, it's only a little bit of density. And when you say, let's give that incentive and let's give that density, but we're gonna put a covenant on your property and lock you in against the free world market, I don't know many that would be financed easily to do that. Policies, deed restrictions, definitely, if no matter what we're thinking of, we'll have a covenant, a deed restriction, so that affordability index grows over time, but that it's always in that stock. I think if nothing else, we have a displacement strategy coming out of this, so that if Chimney Cove calls, Pastor June, thank you, but if Chimney Cove calls and says, we've been given a notice, whether it's 30 days or 120 days, what's our role, right? What's our role is the bigger question here. What's our role in the displacement strategy? Is it Pastor June and nonprofits, or is it our involvement? And are we leading or are we assisting? Because at some point, I think housing gets solved with our involvement, whether we're collaborating on a great new subdivision that we want some of it to be below market rate, below 120% AMI. So are we facilitating and collaborating on that? And how do we do that? Through incentives, maybe contribution of land, whatever. And then I think sometimes, like North Point, we're point on the development, on the P3. We are in charge of that. That is our project. We didn't concede by just putting some dollars or policy or land forward. So it's a matter of will. I've seen housing authorities work well, and we've seen housing authorities not work well. I think a lot of it is about the structure of it, the bylaws of it, and the expectations out of the gate. I encourage you to just Google some resort great communities in our country. Breckenridge as an example, Martha's Vineyard as an example. I think that you'll find that the local municipality doesn't solve it by themselves. The county's very involved. Housing authorities are involved. Regional solutions are involved. And I kind of think that if I bring a framework forward, it needs to be all-encompassing and at the end of the day, get us organized. Right? So that's my thought, and I still not sure where you want me to be by November 1st as a collective body.
Okay, but I see you moving up there.
Yeah, Tom referenced something I said last week, and there are 4 parts to this that I see, and a framework is high level, but it identifies the key ingredients of an implementable program, and the 4 elements in my mind are the public understanding of what's at risk and the public support moving forward in the program. So it's the public. The second is the financial component. How are you going to get the money and how much do you need? The third is the management. And here I'm talking about the long-term commitment, the sustainability of the organization. And the fourth is planning. How does a community put land in a position or existing buildings in a position to be able to be utilized by the private sector investment? And so it's a planning / LMO component. And I think those 4 elements of the framework have to be dealt with.
Next steps, Thomas?
See what Mark comes up with by November 1st, given those 4 elements, keeping it at a very high level such that the town has some latitude in which way we go given the circumstances, not the least of which and most urgent is North Point. And recognizing that we're going to learn some things from the responses we get to the RFPs, and then build the strategies and tactics behind the 4 goals that David mentioned.
Tammy, next steps?
Well, the next steps needs to make sure that our voices are heard, all ideas are considered, and that we're not looking for a one-solution plan.
David?
Well, I said what I was on my mind, but the other thing that I would say, the November 1st date may be artificial, but it is forcing us to make decisions that we haven't been willing to make previously. And if it requires us to work harder in order to get to that deadline, then I think we should be working harder. So we're compressing the time frame and forcing us to make decisions that we haven't been willing to make previously.
Bill?
I totally agree with David. There's no reason why we can't create the overall architecture of the situation. And in doing that, then we won't be here, but others can start following it. But unless we, I think deadlines are great. You have to get off your duff and get something done. And with all due respect to what Glenn said earlier, we've done a lot. That's debatable.
We haven't dealt with the two important ones, funding and management.
Right. Those are we have community. We haven't done well with community either. We haven't done well in educating. So your 4 points, I think, are pillars to build on here. And if we can commit to that, and as a group, again, I'm repeating, but recognize as a group, we do have a problem. We have enough data to at least guesstimate the size of the problem. Let's put that out there, in addition to David's 4. And let's say housing is going to hopefully address what percent. And to Tammy's point, it's not the only thing. There's a lot of other things out there that we have to do. We keep throwing transportation as the obvious. But Mark got more into the weeds on density, LMO, and all of that good stuff, and that's real important. But so I would like to see David think about crafting a motion to his point. And I know we can't vote here, but at least get a consensus, we're going to do it. And we may not get everybody here at this table to agree, but at least have the public have some idea of where there's enough consensus to do something.
I'm learning a lot here, listening to this discussion. Clearly, from the public, there is a problem. We recognize the problem. My comments earlier about the fact we haven't done anything is not correct. We have tried some things, they just haven't worked the way we hoped that they would have. With regard to the November 1st deadline, we have an RFP out right now. We will be hearing from that by the end of October.
I'll have the responses early October. And so, you know.
Early October is good news. It's good news to me because those proposals are going to teach us a lot because the people, the firms that we have reached out to have experience and expertise in doing exactly this. And that's where we're going to learn a great deal. And so I look forward to those proposals, to some hopefully creative ideas that haven't really occurred to us yet. And if we're going to have those by early October, that will give us an opportunity to study those after we receive them and to come forward and respond to the challenge you put before us, John. And so I'm willing to do that work in the month of October.
Yeah, so I second Councilman Ames' informal motion of the 4 points that he made: funding, management, communications, and the whole planning idea. And the only thing that I'd add is, as we move towards this November 1 date, and I'm still absolutely in favor of that, is that we just support Mr. Orlando if he comes back to us and says, hey, my staff capacity is not there, I need to increase, because again, this is a critical piece of the puzzle that is just not being spent enough time on. That's it.
Okay, before I get a few public comment here, my idea, and we'll do this for the time being, I would like Tom and David to work with Mark to put a draft of the first framework. I'd like a draft to come out of the council rather than out of the town manager's office. Mark will assist you too in writing the first framework. Okay? Yes? I see your lips moving.
Is framework synonymous with a high-level motion?
Yes, it is. Okay. Public, any questions from the, or comments from the public? Come on, don't disappoint me. Anybody? Terry? You stand up and tell everybody who you are. Nothing.
Everything you said is encouraging, and it's, there's a lot of spirit in the room, there's a lot of intent, and that's really appreciated. I think everybody here sees that and feels that. There's still an elephant in the room, and it's called gentrification, and it's going at warp speed. And this is not to throw a wrench in everything you just said, but it is a horrible, very real thing that's happening due to a confluence of a lot of different things going on at the same time. You can't stop it, but at least maybe you can, as a group, consider some creative thinking and some energy to how you slow it down, how do you maybe reverse it in some situations and so forth. So I hope you give a lot of attention to that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Reverend June.
I'm Pastor June from Christ Lutheran Church, and I didn't hear specifically, Mark Orlando alluded to it, is there going to be some sort of ordinance or something about the days that we give people if they are evicted from apartments, just like Jimmy?
Can you rephrase that again?
Probably not asking it really good. Is there something that the town can do to make sure that people aren't given 30 days to leave their homes?
There's not something that we can do via an ordinance. It's what I mentioned to and alluded to, that there be a displacement strategy in place. One, I think that, if nothing else, I think that it was heard that we expect more than a 30-day notice as a community. I think that first and foremost is stronger than any ordinance that we're turning to on page 902. There is not a legal way to mandate length of time. That's through the courts, that's through contracts, it's through leases and things like that. But there are displacement strategies that we can put in place that help us mobilize a lot faster. And I refer to it, well, I won't say that word, but let's just say an emergency management situation, right? We know what season we're in. I don't say that word out loud unless I have to. But we're in emergency season. We have a contingency plan that if X, then Y. And I think that we will put something in place for that, so that the community knows what our role is, what their role is, and how we work together.
And it has to go before a judge, case by case, not the whole place together. I talked to a couple of judges over the weekend. It could take a long time to go case by case before the judge reviews. Yes.
Will Robinson, pastor at First Presbyterian Church here on the island. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your willingness to address this. Thank you for rubbing your brains. I call it rubbing brains. It's good to agree to disagree and have these conversations. I know I stand prepared to live with the community to be able to work to try to address this. Okay?
Thank you. Young lady in front.
My name is Julie Reno, and I am a member of the Christ Lutheran Church. I am also a grief counselor for children, specializing with children. And I would like us to really focus on that 30-day eviction notice, because there's no way that we won't create trauma for those children who are displaced in 30 days. Their schooling, their friends, everything's disrupted. The way that families are organized will be totally disrupted. So, for the purpose of protecting our children, I would suggest that we really push in those courts that we are the voice for those children who will be traumatized by this.
Thank you. Sean, you're going to lead item number 4?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you have a question, sir? Sure.
Levon Stevens, the Gulf Education for Cultural Preservation. I just made a few notes as we were talking. The one thing that I think is relevant is certainly the work that we're doing with our task force. It pertains to cultural preservation. Again, one of the elephants in the room is we're talking about partnerships, land, and most of the land, as we know, is on Mid-Island or the North End, which is where a lot of the Native Islanders and people who are going through issues now. The South End has been saturated and pretty much developed. So I would encourage us as we look for private and public partnerships to take that into consideration. This is certainly a way to create cultural preservation. Stop pursuing Native Islands property. Partner with them to create economic opportunities. We're losing land as it is in our Native Island communities, and Black and brown people are having a very hard time living here. We're not trying to create communities that discount people because of their income. As was mentioned before in your discussion, we want everybody to participate equally and to have an opportunity to live like everybody else lives on the island. This becomes a problem because we have failed in the past to do a great master plan. So here we are. We don't have diversity in our properties. We don't have diversity in our living. We don't have diversity. We have a huge gap in the haves and the have-nots, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. So there are ways to maybe address this problem through cultural preservation, equity, and diversity. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Sean?
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're a little over our time, and I want to make sure that we get through these next items. I just want to introduce, many of you have seen our consultants from MKSK here as we've been working on this project for almost a year. They've done a deep dive in the Mid-Island District, which is part of our strategic action plan item. This is the first district that we're assessing from a redevelopment standpoint. It's focused around the Mid-Island Tract, which was the former Port Royal Golf Course property. And they're going to present today additional findings and then recommendations related to the district center, the historic neighborhoods, and then district-wide recommendations that provide us a framework that we will use to develop the plan and bring back for November 1st, I believe, for council. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Brian and Andrew, and they can begin working through the presentation.
Thank you, Sean. Mr. Mayor, council members, thanks for having us once again. I'm going to turn this directly over to Andrew Overbeck, my able colleague. We're going to speak first to the district planning and then to the Mid-Island Tract. Also, I want to acknowledge Tony Rell, one of our able colleagues as well. Andrew, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Good to see you all this morning. Really happy to be with you and talk through both the district and the park. I'll start by talking with you all about where we are with the district, focusing in on future land use map, and then really providing a little more information on the sort of district center, the heart of the Mid-Island, and then also talking a little bit about the historic neighborhoods. I think as you all are talking about housing, there's some elements here that I think could be impactful there, and certainly it's something that's on our minds as well. And then Brian will talk through the park elements, phasing and costs, and we'll talk together about next steps, and again, aiming toward November 1st there as well. A number of things that we've sort of gone back and looked at sort of time and time again as we've had these conversations with you all and with the community, looking back to Charles Frazier's 7 basic principles for the island and thinking through island character and what does this place mean and how is it special and different from anywhere else. Also looking at the planning work that you all have done, with our plan, again, gave us some guideposts to aim at. Certainly provides a framework for the work that you all are all doing right now on a number of different topics. And then also looked at the Gullah Geechee Culture Preservation Project report. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we start to think through the historic neighborhood part of the district. But again, really good recommendations there. A lot of things that you all have been working to implement. A couple of other things left to be done there that we wanted to talk with you all about today. We've been at this a little more than a year at this point. A lot of great community engagement. that's taken place, events that took place last year, about this time last year, in the Mid-Island Tract itself to invite people to that space. They're already using it. I think one of your better survey responses in terms of volume when we did that work about a year ago, and then we've met with a number of different stakeholders, more than 100 folks throughout the community. These are just sort of the general categories of stakeholders that we've met with. Everything from neighborhood representatives to those that are owners of commercial property through the district, folks that are interested in the park and other user groups there as well. And while that's impossible to read, a pretty huge list of stakeholders that were outreached to, a number of which we were able to talk with. But it really boils down to a few results that I wanted to just remind you of. I know we've talked about this before. Because of the fact that there's a golf course in the middle of, a disused golf course in the middle of the district park was sort of top of people's minds when it came to improvements and things they saw that needed to happen in the district. But I think the other categories of responses we got, walkability, things to do from dining, events, shopping, workforce housing is pretty high on that list. I think it shows that you all have done a good job of, recognizing this is a community need because we keep hearing it. So again, how do we sort of look at all of these needs and desires and sort of boil that down into something that we can, make an actionable plan out of? So we had a lot of questions that sort of got back to, or answers that got back to the park, because people seem to really want to see that happen, and also to the district. So from a park perspective, a recognition that maybe, wanted to be a little more natural, a chance to really, return that natural character to this space, addressing environmental concerns throughout the district, and having a couple active components to it. So Brian will talk a little more about that, but we got good direction from the community from that standpoint. We talked about the district really focusing in on that built environment, and going back to a lot of community conversation around traffic and infrastructure and walkability and safety being top of people's minds. I think a recognition that the commercial shopping centers that are sort of the heart of the district are in a state of disrepair and need of improvement. The need for affordable and workforce housing. So again, we had a lot of some common themes and concerns that we heard from the community. And it really boiled down to these three major points. We need to protect and enhance our people, the neighborhoods, the culture and history, the natural environment, the preserves and parks, and the parkway character. We want to connect people, open spaces, neighborhoods, community hubs of activity together. Those are things we need to work on. And then we recognize there needs to be an evolution. And we need to look at where are we in terms of land use today? What do we need to change that to in order to facilitate the types of development, the needs that we have on the island in this district? So that is everything from talking about mixed use development to the potential for infill on some of our residential zone pieces of ground, people's property. And then what are those standards? How do we do it? So those are the things that we're sort of working toward in this work. And the strategic direction then, as we start to think about this holistically as an entire district with a park at the center, how do we preserve and protect that park and that natural environment, the historic and cultural assets that are here? How do we connect existing neighborhoods, open spaces, community destinations together safely? How do we create a mixed-use center at the core of the district to meet community needs and market demands? We want to think about enabling the evolution of land use patterns to allow for that to happen, both in terms of at the sort of district center and these retail uses, but also in the neighborhoods where there might be some neighborhood commercial and other infill housing opportunities to meet the need for housing and that partnership that some here in the community just now were talking about. And then what's the successful framework for implementation? So that's where we're headed with this work, and wanted to start really by looking at the district as a whole, and then we're going to drill down into the center a little bit here to start. But it's a big area, right? There's some areas of change, and those are the items outlined here, or the sort of places outlined in the black outline. But we wanted to focus in on a couple places. Where do we have town-owned property? The area around the airport, our commercial core, and then in the historic neighborhood. So those are the places where we knew we needed to spend some special attention. We fully recognize that there's a lot of history and culture in the Mid-Island District that's shaped by those neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods, and historic churches that are in the Mid-Island District. And we have, we took a look at the existing zoning to see where we've got some things we might want to reconsider or think about. There's a lot of items in the Gullah Geechee Heritage report that point toward maybe some thoughts and changes there. We looked at the existing land use. You can see a lot of different colors on the map here. Probably hard to distinguish from this distance even the different colors. We want to think about how do we simplify that, tell a simpler story about the district, especially as we're starting to focus in on certain spaces and maybe clean some of that up a little bit. So that's how we've moved toward a potential future land use map that does consolidate and collapse a few categories, but starts to help us think about some of these areas of change in a little bit more of a focused manner and bring some clarity to that. So you can see the purple color as we think about the sort of heart of the Mid-Island District, where we think mixed-use development that supports a lot of the community concerns could occur. We look at the area around the airport as having commercial services that need to service the airport and the sort of light industrial warehouse uses that are there. They're needed on the island. It's a good place for them. And then looking at the residential areas, and could we start to see some neighborhood commercial and some other types of residential infilling, and where we have maybe an opportunity to have some partnerships and give people economic opportunity to develop some of their property. So we look at the area around the airport as being that commercial service area, and again, supporting the growth of the airport, but also the fact that there's some existing light industrial spaces there that are important. There are a sort of couple corridors along Dillon and Matthews that provide retail service, lodging. So those are important uses in the district and provide neighborhood scale commercial space. So those are along a couple corridors. But then focusing in primarily on this mixed use core, and then opportunities in the other residential areas throughout the district. So those are the places we want to focus in on in today's conversation as we start to put this plan together to bring to you all here by November 1st. So starting with the district center, I think as we go back to this, again, we're always returning to what the natural features are and what are the historical pieces we need to think about. We want to create an integrated, interconnected green district. We have a lot of parks and preserves. We'll talk about that here in a moment. We have history and culture that we need to integrate and expand economic opportunity. We've talked a lot about creating a walkable district. What does that mean? How do we connect safely across the parkway? How do we make it so that it's easy to get around and make that choice to get out of an automobile? We want to talk about mix of uses and repositioning some of our commercial ground in the district, creating an identity and ensuring that it fits the character of the island, another really important point. And then finally, making sure that this district center, as you're investing in public space, as you're investing in infrastructure along the parkway, or other roadway or pathway improvements, multimodal improvements, that there's the corresponding reinvestment by the private market to make these spaces what they need to be for the community. As similar as what you've seen at Low Country Celebration Park as the private markets responded to that public reinvestment. So we want to make sure we harness that and also direct it. So that's really the key here. As we've been talking about this together over the last several months, since May, how do we direct it? And so what are some components? What are the things we sort of put out on the table? We say if anything comes forward, it needs to meet these standards, needs to have these features. So we're talking about compact, walkable neighborhoods. We're talking about public space that anchors a district. So even in a redevelopment, we have public space embedded in that provides a center, provides that grounding. Active first floors and a vertical mix of uses. So again, we're talking about lower scale buildings here, but it's important that we think about that vertical mix of uses. We might have a storefront on the ground floor in an office or a townhome above. Those sorts of things we need to start to think about. And then as we also look at the character of the space that we have today, a lot of it is dominated by surface parking. We've got to find a way to treat parking differently. If we want walkability, we can't be walking past acres and acres and acres of surface parking. So integrating that parking, having on-street parking, but also behind buildings is incredibly important. So as we think about these, this is how they all sort of start to fit together. and then thinking about that mix of uses that we would want to see together. Again, not just responding to what the community said, but what the market's already doing. So if you start to look at even Port Royal, the things they're doing to make that space more attractive, dividing up a larger floor plate into smaller businesses, the market is already sort of moving in this direction. So we want to harness that a little bit. But we're talking about a mix of uses. It's retail, restaurant, apartments, townhomes, office, potentially some institutional open space uses. Density at that district center, depending on the product, could be 12 to 18 dwelling units an acre. We're going to keep into the character of the island. Again, 3-story maximum. I think as we recall from our earlier conversations this spring, there's obviously airport considerations there as well, but also, it's the island character that we're concerned about too. So again, 2 to 3 stories. We want to provide structured parking, similar to other projects you all have done recently on the island, certainly placing surface lots behind buildings. And then that landscape green edge along the parkway, that's your character. We have that green natural buffer along the parkway that should still exist and give shape to redevelopment in these areas. So as we look toward recommendations, obviously we have a future land use map that we've talked about. Then it comes to what's the framework? How do you guide that redevelopment to create that compact walkable district? We want it to be mixed use, and to do that we need to take a look at the zoning code and create standards to get us there. We need to look at organizational and financial tools, as you've all have started to talk about with housing. What are some of those incentives or financial tools you could use, from a TIF district to investments you all are thinking about, to considering a community development corporation potentially. A lot of different choices there. But at the core of it, we want to leverage the investment that's happening in public space, in public infrastructure, for maximum community benefit. So what does that look like in the district center? I want to think through, again, how do all these pieces fit together? So we're sort of zoomed into the center here at Port Royal, Sea Turtle, Northridge, in the Mid-Island tract. And we're thinking through, how do these green protected areas fit together? So again, it's providing that structure to this work. And we're looking primarily here at this mixed-use center. And then how do those all connect to each other? So where might we need to make intersection improvements, help people get across the parkway, the character of those streets as we go into these commercial districts? Again, I think we're going to start to think about those in the future, less as driveways and drive aisles and more as public streets. And how do we start to have a character that's a little more fitting with the island? Are there opportunities along the parkway to treat it a little bit differently, create gateways, enhanced intersections, again, to help people traverse the corridor? Connecting to other surrounding development, community assets such as the library. What are the trail and other improvements we need to make, both inside of some of these green open spaces, park spaces, but also at the edges? So as we look at the corridor work together, we're talking about multi-use paths, shared use paths on both sides of the parkway. We think it should be on both sides of Matthews. We want to connect into the neighborhoods that surround these centers of activity in the district. And again, this goes off the map and gets to the north as well here, not just here in the district. And then how does all of that fit together? So again, that holistic strategy to change the way we're thinking about the heart of the district. So we started to think through, and again, you all asked at our May workshop that we look at economic feasibility. So not just what the market study would sort of say is possible here. How do we get there? What are some of those strategies? So in order to do that, I think we've talked about this. There's probably 10, 15 ways you could start to look at these parcels and how they may change in character. But we wanted to look at, sort of test this form and character that we've talked about. We also wanted to put some things down on paper so that our economic consultant at Kimley Horn could do their market feasibility work, which they're actively working on right now. So there's a bit of a program and sort of capacity analysis that we've done. So what you'll see in the next drawing really is a way to start to think about how might you add housing, how might you change some of these uses today to not just be retail only, but also mixed use. So the areas there in purple could have housing, office, ground floor retail. How do we start to change the character of these streets so that we're talking about internal walkable roadways? If you think about what happened at Shelter Cove when they redeveloped that, They created maybe, half a walkable street, right? A couple, storefronts that, are walkable. We're now talking about doing that as you turn into these shopping areas, creating that character that really makes it a walkable place. And encouraging you to sort of get out of your car and walk around and maybe do a couple things instead of just one thing there. So again, testing out the capacity, trying to understand what that form that we've all talked about, that character looks like on the ground. And then how does that fit together with all the other neighborhoods, all the other uses, the potential of a park across the street? How does that all fit together with the Ashmore tract? How do we keep that in island character? So again, it's green, it's connected. It's a set of uses that work together, that bring the community together, that is truly, a gathering place. And I think when we work with our friends with Victor Dover, what is that island character? What does that look like on the ground? So if you can imagine sort of standing in one of these black circles here, sort of where you might have 4 buildings coming together, really, what does that look like if you're on the ground? What is that character? Again, we'll have to define that together as we go forward into developing standards as a next step. But again, it's vertical mix of uses, active first floors, places the community comes together, it's walkable. We've got on-street parking, we have street trees, we've got some businesses as well as maybe, residential or office above those. And then, different kind of, injecting a character in these streets that has street trees, maybe on-street parking, maybe a median, but again, these are green streets. They're walkable. You have, restaurants that might spill out onto the street. You have storefronts that are active. It's a bit of a different character than what you have today, although I think they're starting to think this way already in incremental improvements to some of these shopping areas. So that's where we've landed with the sort of district center. Wanted to move on to the historic neighborhoods and think through some of the things you all were asking us about back in May as well. So we've done a lot of work over the last couple months to think that through as well. And again, looking very strongly back at the Gullah Geechee Preservation Report and what some of those recommendations were, what progress you all have made in implementing some of those, and where we've maybe had some things to overcome still. So wanted to go through that. So again, we'll be focusing in here on the yellow areas throughout the district. Again, the report really, I think, did a good job of pointing out where the issues were and what some of the potential solutions are. And that's some of the things we want to talk about today. So they recognized, and we'll go through this with a map here in a moment, that some of the areas that are zoned RM4 today really don't let people maximize the development potential of their property, right? There's some density concerns there, and there's a different way of looking at it depending on what size your parcel is. There's maybe a fair degree of confusion around that. Recognition that setbacks and buffering requirements also needed to be relaxed in order to allow people maximum benefit of their property, as well as open space requirements. So there was a proposal in that report for an overlay. We really started to look at it as, is there a base zoning that we could establish, as a starting point to really clarify the position there. And so that's something that we wanted to sort of test out. We've done some thinking about together with you all. And again, looking at the existing land uses, a lot of different things going on. Wanted to focus in today. It's a little bit washed out on the screen, but essentially the green areas that are inside the black outline. So you can see almost every one of these historic neighborhoods has a portion of that light green, which is that RM4 low to moderate density zoning. And again, we're talking about land use, but we're getting into a little bit of zoning conversation around what we might allow inside that land use. So this is where we're really focusing in the conversation today, these areas that are green. Again, a little hard to see on the screen, a little washed out, but it's essentially that these areas of green inside each of those historic neighborhoods. Now, those are today have inside RM4, depending on the size of your parcel, your lot, you could build up to 8 dwelling units an acre. Depending how big. So 5 acres, you can go to 8. So again, inside RM4, you're already allowing a range of densities. We're going to suggest that we pick a number and have that as something we're aiming toward to provide a little bit of clarity and a stronger path forward for folks that are interested in doing something different with their property. So I won't go through this. I'm going to click through these pretty quickly here because we did look at every single neighborhood. Again, what the existing land use is, what the zoning is. Some places have both RM4 and RM12. Again, where there's already something that's RM12 or something that's different than RM4, we're staying agnostic to. We're really focusing in on the RM4 only in this case. And so you can see each one of these then has a recommendation from the Geechee Culture Heritage Preservation Report. Again, they were still sort of trying to fit in the existing zoning code and what do we allow for 3 acres, 5 acres, 1 acre. We're really suggesting we just simplify that and say, look, there's a base zoning, a base density that's allowed. So again, we did that for every single one of these, and I think it informed our conversations and our recommendation here. So we looked at Big Hill, we looked at Mitchellville, same thing. A little bit more of a mix of different zoning categories in Mitchellville, but again, just focusing in on the RM4. Did the same up in Big All and Marshland. And we can go back to any of these at any point if you want to today, but wanted to sort of get to the recommendations here. First and foremost, we want to advance and celebrate the history and culture of the Native Islanders. There's opportunity here for that. We want to make sure that these neighborhoods are economically sustainable. And that's going to mean that we're allowing for, infill residential development, but also some commercial and home business opportunities. So where are there opportunities for people to have a small business, a farm market, a restaurant, things that are neighborhood in scale, but allow people to, do business on their property, and that's something we wanted to talk about. We also think there's an opportunity here with partnerships to increase the amount of housing and potentially the affordable workforce options on the island, but again, an opportunity there. And at the end of the day, we're trying to optimize the use of people's property. And again, getting that clarified and simplified is an important point. So same as to the district, what are the rules of the road? What are some components we need to have in these areas? Again, we're talking about, compact, walkable form. We're talking about prioritizing streets and sidewalks, pedestrian and bike connections. Again, people focused. These are neighborhoods, and they need to be done in a context sensitive way. So as we look at the uses that are potential here, we're talking about residential of different types of scales, and we'll show you examples of where you've already, there's already been reinvestment in some of these areas, the types of things. We've seen everything from duplexes or garden apartments to two-family, opportunity for single-family homes as well. Again, sort of keeping in the scale and character of the island. We are recommending that to just simplify RM4, just allow for 6 dwelling units an acre across the board. So whether it's 1 acre, 3 acre, 5 acre parcel, simplify it, create that standard. And it's walkable neighborhood scale and character. So that's essentially what we think should happen, that consistent uniform density standard and development pattern, allowing for 6 dwelling units an acre. Need to calibrate, again, this is going to take additional effort, calibrate the setback and buffering, those internal requirements and open space requirements to allow for infill development, recognizing that these are smaller parcels, so some of those standards will need to be adjusted. We're going to allow for those home-based businesses, those neighborhood commercial uses, but also thinking through that we want to make sure there's still a predominance of residential on a site. So as we think through that, looking at 75% residential and up to 25% neighborhood commercial. So again, that use mix is pretty critical there too, to maintain that neighborhood feel. So how did we get to 6? We went around and looked at what's being built, not only what you allow, but what's being built. So you'll see in some of these cases we looked at the residential zoning would have allowed for more, but the market built around 6. So that's sort of what we found. We looked at the infill development that happened already in Grassland. You've got a 3 acre parcel, wound up building 18 units, and it's around almost 6 dwelling units an acre, so 5.7. So again, That's something that's been built and it's on the ground today. In Mitchellville, similarly, you have this development that again is a little more than 5 dwelling units an acre on 8 acres. Again, it was in the RM4. So again, this is a product that is on the market and seems to be working. So again, it's within that range of density. In Mitchellville, another development, this is just about 6 dwelling units an acre as well. It was in the RM12 category, so you can see even in that RM12, they built something that was closer to 6 as well from a market perspective. So, you know, another sort of reason why we sort of went down to that level and looked at, you know, 6 being kind of a good middle ground and you know, allow for some consistency. This is down off Marshland, a recent development. Again, a little more than 5 dwelling units an acre. A bit of a different style of development than what you've seen in some of these other parts of the district. But again, I think you know, looking at you know, development across the district, across the island, you know, as we look at that, 6 seems to make a lot of sense as you think that through. And then working with Victor and his team and establishing some character and thought about that. You know, we've looked at these as neighborhood streets that have you know, the potential for you know, commercial uses, as you can see on the sort of top corner. How does that fit into a very compact, walkable residential scale throughout the district and throughout some of these neighborhoods? And again, thinking through these streets, again, they're neighborhood scale. They could have on-street parking. They might not have on-street parking. You know, narrow, walkable streets within the district. And again, making sure that they are amenitized with street trees and other things that make them comfortable places. As we think through recommendations then across the district, wanted to give you a sense of where we're landing on that. Where again, after today, we're going to do more work, put our collective brains together, and continue to get you a summary document that really sets the roadmap for how do we get there for this. But the first step really is that future land use map and adopting that. And then we roll into the second piece of adopting a policy framework and standards that will result in this compact, walkable district and environment that we're talking about. So there's a lot of small type up here. I'll summarize it, and maybe Sean, you've got some thoughts here too. But we start by making those public investments. Public investment in park space that Brian's going to talk about. And that investment in creating the policies and standards that will support the type of development we're talking about. And I think then the support that we need to give to private property owners, whether that's someone that owns you know, property in these historic neighborhoods, you know, they're going to need help to figure out if they want to develop some things, they're going to need some help to get there, as well the, you know, commercial property owners that are at the heart of the district. So that we need to talk about standards and support that we can give those folks. What are the economic development strategies that we need to think about? What are the other public investments in infrastructure that need to take place to support that? So that's thinking through stormwater and resiliency. It's also thinking through streets, as we talked about, the character, pathways, walkability, intersection improvements. Those are all public investments that will need to take place. Investments in transit and mobility, and, you know, developing, you know, a parking strategy, because if we're going to convert acres of surface parking to a walkable environment, there's going to need to be investment in that infrastructure as well. So please know we're thinking through that policy framework, the implications, and what's necessary in each of that. And then we get into the you know, rules of roads established. How do we actually do it together? And so that's the updating of the zoning code and map to match up with the future land use recommendations, looking through those organizational financial tools to guide implementation. And I know there's a lot of things that have worked in the past and other things we can continue to look at. And then we want to make sure we're leveraging those public investments in the creation of private development that supports the vision that the community has for this part of the island. So those are all pieces that we are we'll continue to work on and make sure you know that these things will be in the report in great detail. And so with that, sort of last thing, and then I'll open up to conversation and go back to anything that we've talked about here. What is that summary report that we're going to give you? What does it look like? We've done a lot of work together. If I'd put all the slides in here that we had reviewed over the last year, we'd probably be at like 300. So please know that I think we've talked about each of these things as of today. So we'll, introduce this process and overview. What have we done? What plans have we looked at? How does it align? How does this vision align with those recommendations? How does it square with the community engagement that we did? Then the next section is about the planning context. What analysis did we do? We have a lot of work that we've done prior to this point on land use and zoning, market analysis, mobility, environmental systems, open spaces, the airport considerations we talked about. Then how did that lead us to that strategic direction we reviewed today? And those improvements that we see need to be made, and those very focused recommendations. And then we'll focus in on implementation and the roadmap to get there. So those are the sort of major chapter headings that we're starting to fill, sort of block that out and start to fill in that content to share with you all before the next time we're together in November. So we'll be doing a couple other things in the meantime after today. There's some additional community meetings that Sean and his team are going to schedule with historic neighborhoods and other stakeholders. Do those in October. There'll be a planning commission briefing in October as well, and we'll bring this back to you for consideration of adoption by resolution on the 1st of November. So we've got a lot of work to do in the next 6 weeks, but we wanted to share with you sort of where we are in the process and the direction we're heading in, and make sure we're on the right path before we put pen to paper, which is our very next step. We'll put pen to paper in 5 minutes if you want us to, but open it up to conversation.
Any questions for the community on what we just presented? Any questions from members of the council? With that, let's take a 5-minute break.
Not a question, I just want to make a comment. Thank you. I thank Andrew and Brian for really following the comprehensive plan. Okay, we started there, right? And I think when we first started that journey, we understood that we were going to get to a point of future land use opportunities or changing. And we've also noticed that in a lot of ways of trying to accomplish the goals in that comprehensive plan, our land management ordinance is conflicting, right? So I really appreciate the direction that you've gone. The one item that is in the small print, maybe smaller than I'd like it to be, is the comp plan also speaks to connectivity, okay? And this island being one that is such. And we're talking about walkable, bikeable streets and that sort of thing, but the whole transportation piece, I think, should be called out more, especially if we're talking about a potential TIF district here where we're going to be raising money. And we're having conversations around how do we expand our transportation here on Hilton Head. I can see this mid-island area being one of interest, even for residents, say in Sea Pines. And of course, you're not going to walk there from Sea Pines. Right. And we're trying to encourage folks not to get in their car to come. What does that look like over the next 10, 15 years? We know that we're going to need a funding mechanism to make it happen. So I just think that piece should be called out just a bit more in the small print. Yeah,
I agree, and it's something we'll continue to work on. I think as we look at and work on transit-oriented development across the country, creating this mix of uses where there's more than one thing going on, that by itself supports the sort of quantity of people, the mixing of people that are there doing different things, whether that's business or living. Then transportation can be more effective because there's a destination there now that's more than just one type of use, and so that by itself helps to support transit improvements as well. So they go together, as to your point.
Glenn?
Take a break. Thank you. I really like the goals and the concepts that I see in this plan, but I'm also looking for the tools that you would recommend that we adopt. And I've picked out two of those from your presentation, and this has to do with land use. And if I understand it correctly, you're suggesting in the core of the district that we do an upgrade to RM12, which would hopefully produce mixed-use development. I've seen mixed-use development. I think most of us have seen it, where you have commercial on the ground floor and residential or office above. I hope that we can achieve that. And if our experts recommend that we use RM12 for that, I'm inclined to go with that. Then the other land use tool that I think I've heard here today is that in the historic neighborhoods, you see limitations in RM4, even though we know that RM4 doesn't mean 4 units to the acre.
Right.
It can be more. And so you're recommending a simplification of that so that the number that's assigned is the number that would be the maximum permitted use. And in that case, you are recommending RM6 for these neighborhoods. That would allow for further density. In I'd say many cases, not just in some cases, and I think that is a really worthy objective. I have mentioned before that I'd like to see on the ground here RM4 versus RM6 and how it works on the island as we are setting this up, and I know that's going to happen. So what I'm saying is I'm looking for the tools, and I know you're building the tools for us, and I appreciate it, and thank you for your expertise.
Thanks, Lynn.
David? Yes, I do have some comments. I think the vision is good. I think the goal statements are aligned with island values, so I'm appreciative of that. I have a question. First, I'll make a comment. I think that we have a number of different districts on the island, and I think it would benefit the community as a place to live, and also from a branding standpoint, if those different districts are allowed to develop their own special character. And so when I'm looking at your boundary map here, I'm wondering, is that one district, or is that two districts, or if it's one, what's the character? And so I don't need an answer today, but I'm looking for the personality of what you're proposing. We have a couple of properties at the south end of the island, commercial properties, that have very strong cash flow. It's been very difficult for those people to want to redevelop. And so my question in the commercial area, the mixed-use area that you are citing, do we have any idea of what the cash flow circumstances are in those commercial properties? Are they likely to be amenable to your proposals?
Want me to answer that in my humble
You may.
opinion, David? First, the last, and that is this mixed-use district. As you've heard from my lips before, as we observe those three areas, they're 1960s, 70s, 80s models of strip commercial development. And in the past, I suspect I know that I spent a fair amount of money in those districts. They have performed very well. You can see by the very condition of the places now that some of them aren't performing very well. And that model of strip commercial center has seen its better days. Market speak, we must listen. I think the market has spoken to the Port Royal Plaza folks that smaller, more nimble, more neighborhood-oriented retail is the call of the day. We know we've got housing needs here. I think that market forces and our economic analysis that we're working on now for this mixed-use development will tell us what the future economic conditions can be, and making sure that our planning recommendations meet the test of financial success. That's the definition of sustainability from my standpoint. One of the three legs of the stool of sustainability. One is financial stability, two is social stability, and three is environmental. So stay tuned. We're testing that to see exactly if this mix of uses is financially stable. I think it is. Our experience has been elsewhere in redevelopments of such that it is. Is it difficult work? Is it a heavy lift? You bet it is. There's multiple property owners. There's financing. There's a role in here for the town to play, or for some development authority to play in partnering with private development. What causes a property owner who's servicing leases now to move off the dime into something that she or he may not be comfortable with, they've not done for the last 30 years? That's all a heavy lift. This is messy business. I'll be the first one to admit it, but it's what the community has told us we need. We fully agree with it. We need neighborhood-oriented commercial. We need affordable and attainable housing. We need a different thing at the center of this district and the center of our island than we have today. Yeah. And now the tough work begins.
I think the bottom line is what incentives are necessary in order for the private sector to get on board.
David, you know as well as Councilman Ames, you know as well as anybody that the first step in land development is control and ownership. Now, if we don't control and own that, might somebody in partnership with those folks take up ownership position? Might we incent that somehow? Or there's TIF districts, there's tax issues that we can put in place, there's infrastructure improvements, parking, utilities, street construction that the town may participate in to incent that private developer to do something that she or he wouldn't otherwise do. So there's a lot of tools available, all of which will be documented in this report that you will see in late October, early November. So there's, I repeat, it's tough business. If it were easy, it would have been done by now.
Housing, and I'm directing these comments primarily at the Gullah Native Island community, just because of the 4 DU per acre density that's there now, but it may also apply to the mixed use component. There are 2 issues here in my mind. One is the affordable housing component, and 2 is short-term rentals. It seems to me that we recognize that we have a workforce housing issue on this island, and that we have a short-term rental issue on the island. Is there any way to create in your package of increasing densities components to deal with those 2 items?
Yeah, through the entitlement or the LMO revisions that will spin out of this, that mixed use development will have its own criteria. We may very well, the town may very well put forth restrictions, requirements for that affordable component as a basis of that zoning that may be enticed with other financial tools the town can put in place to encourage and even increase that affordable component. That's worked elsewhere in the past and is presently. As I've said before, we're not the Lone Rangers in this town with struggling with the affordable and attainable housing problem. It is everywhere. It is everywhere. It's certainly in at a critical place in the town. So, long answer to short question, but yeah, we'll put forth some of those recommendations as to what the town can do through the entitlement process to encourage and increase.
Thank you. Last comment, and you hit this one, Andrew, very, very well and directly, and that's parking strategy. If I look at all your plans, the only solution I can see is a multi-story parking garage. Am I?
No, that's right. That's right. And let me hit that one head on. There's the antithesis of a walkable community mixed-use development is large surface parking lot fields. Again, that was the model of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Big boxes with big parking fields out in front. You drive up, you walk in, you go back out, you're off. That's not what this district, this mixed-use district is all about. That's not what the community said they want. We want walkable. We want places where our kids can safely get across the parkway or down the street on foot, on bike, to shop for the things that we need, not just for the tourist trade. This is started with the neighborhoods. What do the neighborhoods need? The folks that live and work here. Where can we go to have local foodstuffs, not national nameplate out parcels? Where can we go for local foodstuffs, for local goods and services? Where can we go to work and recreate and live and congregate? That's where this mixed-use development is the antithesis of what we see there today. Where's the ground to do that? Well, right now it's under all the asphalt. What do you do with the asphalt? Because automobiles are not going away, and certainly in my lifetime. So you've got to take that asphalt plate and you got to stack them. And where do you stack those? Someplace where it's convenient, but it's not the center of attention in that mixed-use development. It's to the periphery. It's encased, if you will, with other usable architecture. And we've strategically placed those parking structures. They may be a single deck. They may be multiple decks. That's going to be a product of what those tenants are and what the automobile needs are and what our transit system is all about on the island.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. That's the key point in my mind. What does this community look like in 15 years in terms of on-island transportation?
Here, here.
Because if we start solving that problem, then Coligny begins to develop differently. Palmetto
right.
Bay Road develops differently, and Main Street. So I think that looking at this as a model for new districts, other districts on the island is important.
That's right. We picked the most complex and, dare I say, difficult district because all of the disparate parts that this district represents. But I think you're absolutely right. Lessons learned here, and this has been a lot of hard work on the part of the town and our constituency. But that can be applied elsewhere. But I'm amazed at how good of a transit system we have now with such modest resources and organization to it. They've done a fantastic job, but that's just literally a drop in the bucket.
With
I
that
think
drop
we
in
need
the bucket,
much
we'll take a
more
10-minute break.
Much more.
In the bucket, we'll take a 10-minute break.
Yeah, okay. Speaking of drop in the bucket.
Back to finish up in the last segment. Mr. Bill, you had a couple of comments to make?
I just wanted to continue that conversation. I think what I see today is really good on a concept level, and I think the hard work is before us. And the hard work, in my mind, is that when you translate all of this, what we're creating is a micro economic little ecosystem. And what that means is that there's going to be a lot of dependence and interdependence here. And so I think what we need to do is make some assumptions about this at a concept level, translate that into a model where we envision certain types of housing, certain types of retail, certain types of restaurant activity, certain types of shops, all of which will create economic energy. And the question is, on a sum total basis, as well as an individual basis, will it work? And if I'm running a business over there now, and let's say it's sort of sludging along, which some of them are, I would, but I like Hilton Head and I want to stay here. I'd like to have an economic sense about what this whole thing is going to look like and how it's going to run, so that it may be creating an opportunity for me to change my business, maybe to change some of the product line I'm offering, or maybe a total transformation. And that's a lot better than getting into a taking situation where we would have a terrible price to pay to encourage someone to leave. So I'm enthused about what we see, but this economic model is going to be very important. And I think it's going to be an iterative process, because we'll come up with a model and it may not be running at the rate of speed we want. So we may pluck something here, we may put something else here, and then see how it fits. But if I were to invest in this, I'd like to see that model to see if I could thrive here. I think it's going to be our major selling point to bring capital here. Thank you.
Kimmy?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we've talked about this several times, and it keeps getting better each time that you bring it forward. So I am excited about the idea of a redevelopment plan that encourages capital to come to the island, that provides additional housing opportunities. What I'm cautious about, though, forever the devil's advocate in the room, what I'm cautious about is that we are acutely aware of the height, the density that it plays with that third dimension that I always talk about, where the person could get lost in the development and not provide the space for the enjoyment of the development and what we're known for, our environment, our ecology. And so I'm cautious about those things. And I know we'll get there. I'm also cautious, and I know we'll get here because we're doing better. I'm cautious about development like this taking place near and around residential neighborhoods where people have bought land, built their lives, had expectations, and then something pops up next to them. We know in the past there's been failures with that, but we've gotten better. We'll continue to get better, I'm sure. So that concerns me. Concerns me on some of this with regard to what type of businesses go where and whether or not they're appropriate within neighborhoods or near neighborhoods. We know that in the past, there are homes that have been, and lives that have been upheaved because of that. You showed a picture, Andrew, of, or we talked about the development on Marshland that was, could have been more, but it's just under 5, close to 6 units per acre. I think everyone in this room knows what that development looks like, right? So while it is less than it could have been, it is horrible. There isn't anyone who drives past that and doesn't call or write to me about their distaste for what they see being built there. So that is a note from the neighbors. In addition, there was one of the pictures, and I don't know, I think it's down Dillon, where we talked about they could have done 12 units per acre, but they're only at 6 and they look like nice duplexes. That was a project, a piece of land that came up around 4 years ago or so, 3 years ago, where it was rezoned by the request, I voted no, by the request of the owners of the property to increase the density there, with promise that they were going to renew and increase the workforce housing that is there and more that would be there. Nothing has happened with that property since then. So what I was fearful of then, and remains so, is that we all did was provide increased profitability to that owner when he resells it to someone else, and he never follows through with the project. So that was a concern then. It's a concern of mine now. So just a heads up to be on the lookout for those types of things as we are moving forward. I do think that, transportation on the island is interesting, but I think that we've had discussions about transportation on the island, which is different than transportation getting onto the island, where we know that folks who live behind their gates are reluctant and really don't have a mechanism to get from their home outside their gates to take public transportation. So that's, we're never going to, as I've heard someone say in the past, force people to use public transportation on the island. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be available and have the opportunity to get around the island that way. Just a note on that from my perspective. So there's a number of little things that we need to touch on. There's a big picture that needs to be really, really focused in on. As we begin these types of projects, it's good for the community, it's good for economics. I don't want to lose Hilton Head in the midst of it. People say, in not very favorable terms that we're going to turn into Myrtle Beach. I've heard a bit about Myrtle Beach recently from some folks. And we have to be ever cognizant of the fact that what brings people onto this island is that we are not Myrtle Beach. When they drive onto the island, they see trees, they see our beautiful wildlife, and that is got to be and must be always a priority above everything else. It's good for us as humans, and it's good for Hilton Head, and I'll leave it all at that.
Alex, last comment before we move on to the next subject?
Let's move on.
Let's move on, okay. Jennifer or Brian, who's gonna?
I'd be happy to talk
Thank you.
about this exciting project. We were together last time in May, and Brian and Andrew and Tony shared with you exciting plans for our 100 acres there in the middle of the district. Today, they're back to share with you the cost estimate and some potential phasing, so we can decide how we might want to move forward with developing this, probably over time, and also, just like the district, move forward with bringing it to you in November for approval. So with that, Brian's going to take it away and lead you through that exercise.
Thank you, Jennifer. As suggested, we've been through hundreds of slides through this design process, and we're not going to reiterate all of those, but I do want to touch upon some of the refresher points, and that are the goals of the tract and that is to connect it with all the other marvelous green spaces we have in the district, to start with the natural features of this tract and the opportunity for the observation of nature, to embrace, understand, showcase, enhance the Gullah history and culture of this place. Maybe like no other area on the island, the mid-island is rich in that history and culture, and I think that adds to the strength and vitality of the brand of Hilton Head as a whole. Encourage open air markets, heritage gardens, places that are civic in quality, not just the traditional park in thought, but a place for community gathering. It is a place for the entire community, residents and visitors, but dare I say, that is in the proper order. It's with the residents in mind, the community in mind, and that will be taken advantage of by our visitors as well. And then consider how we phase this implementation into place, starting with what is now a golf course that wasn't a golf course 70 years ago, cultivated land, and turn it into central civic space, and how we maintain it and operate it. That has got a capital cost to it. So we'll go through a primer on the concept plan and the program areas, go right into project phasing and costs and some of the funding opportunities, and then how we identify this, how we name this place over time for your consideration. First off, we've begun with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, understanding that we need to find a place on the island for our recreational needs. Staff has done a wonderful job of directing us through that, of making sure that we've got the more passive needs in this piece of property, more active in our other active parks, wonderful active parks elsewhere. And in addition to that, we've heard from the public specifically through the website and through interaction, some of the specific things that they would like to see in this piece of property for sake of their lifestyles. All of that taken as a whole is what we're calling the program of uses. We have broken down this concept plan into these 5 areas for sake of ease of understanding. Starting at the left, this active play area is open field for pickup activities and sports, not league play per se. It's along Dillon Road. The heart of the tract is what we're calling the center of the park or the facility. The more intense people places, the eco park, which is the majority of the ground to the north and to the east. That is also the part of the property that is most susceptible to storm inundation and flooding considerations. The island heritage next to Grassland, also the relocation of the St. James Church on Union Cemetery next to the cemetery, all working in concert one to the other. And then the cultivated landscapes, which is a series of gardens and passive open spaces. A perspective view, just to give you a sense of scale of what 102 acres looks like. This is a big piece of property. We're fortunate to have such a big opportunity and significant piece of green space. Before I go on to that, I want to speak, if I can get going backwards. I want to speak a bit, I'm lost now. Am I going backwards?
Now you are, yes.
There we go. I want to speak to its current condition. This is a golf course. It was purchased by the town. It has gone fallow over the last few years for sure. It is a piece of property that is in need of restoration. It was a golf course. The pond system there is not the strongest of environments. We're suggesting that we help that water quality for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the management of stormwater, the resiliency for storm surge, the need to recognize that we've got to recharge the aquifer, move stormwater to and through the park. So this project starts with restoration before we even think about public spaces. To that point, the first phase, we're really calling the park framework. How do we move dirt one time? How do we interconnect the ponds so we get healthy water bodies, the natural flushing and flow through of stormwater, how we accommodate the watersheds and the water that's passing through the site. Much of those stream beds have been put into culverts and for sake of the golf play over the years. So the natural environment is in need of some restoration for sure. From a earthwork, phase one says we're going to dig those lagoons, those interconnected creeks. We're going to restore the stream. We're going to move the earth one time, and as they say, bake the cake before we put icing on it. So we're going to do that once, and we're done with that, no pun intended, the dirty work. That also suggests that certain infrastructure, utility systems will be part and parcel of that first phase. We also need to go through engineering of the whole to make sure at the end of the day the entire site works together as it should from a civil engineering standpoint. We also have to go through the permitting process. So there's a number of upfront things that have to be done to codify this vision moving forward. The other phases, as we've put them as future phases because they don't necessarily have to follow in sequence. It's a matter of what funding comes available, what the public says they would like to see as the next piece of park development. Within reason, we've got to be very careful as to not stepping over or damaging new construction for sake of putting in current construction. Also understand that as we're doing phases of the park, the rest of the park can remain open to the extent that it is today. We're all out in the park today, walking about and taking advantage of that. But I think even in its current condition is a pretty beautiful place. We can still do that. We'll still have the use of the underdeveloped land while we're into the phasing of the park. St. James Baptist Church, as we know, is proposed to move to that southeast corner next to the cemetery. We are suggesting that the Island Heritage section of the park be developed in concert with that, so that construction activity can be concentrated in that corner at one time, and we're disrupting that part of the world only once. You'll see that we've mentioned 97 acres. This is actually a 102-acre parcel, but if you net out the 5 acres for the church, that's 97 acres of civic space. So that's the difference in arithmetic. We've taken the opportunity to look at other significant parks. We may have shared this with some of you in the past around the country, some that we've been involved with, most that we have not, just to understand the scale of park that is out there, civic place, central places that communities are building and utilizing, and understand some of the things that are in those parks. So as we compare that to our park program, we're on par with other progressive communities are doing relative to offerings for their citizenry. Now, some of those costs, because we need to talk about costs, how we get from a vision to built construction in the ground. The Gathering Place in Tulsa, Oklahoma is 66 acres. I'll start by saying it was predominantly privately developed. That is a $465 million park. That's $7 million an acre. That's 7 to 8 times more than the benchmark number that bounces around in this head as we're doing park design. Birmingham, Alabama, again under $1 million an acre, $460,000 an acre for Summit Park in Blue Ash, Ohio, something more akin to the scale and program of this park. Still with a lot of architecture, which has driven that price up. So you can see that these numbers are significant, and the cost of architecture typically is more expensive than the cost of moving dirt. So open ground is cheaper to develop and operate and maintain than buildings. So again, some other more regional or local comparisons. Low Country Celebration, which is a fabulous park in this community, is 10 acres. It is architecture heavy. It has got a world-class play space. But it's only 10 acres. We're 1/10 the size of this Mid-Island tract. Unity Park in Greenville, South Carolina is, again, getting closer to our size, but it's under half the size of the Mid-Island tract. It too has a pretty robust program. The Mid-Island tract, you can see, has even more program, but we've got more real estate. So we were able to have those passive recreation uses and civic uses, and it fits nicely. So now some of those benchmark costs. Low Country Celebration was $14 million. That's $1.4 million an acre. Again, intensely developed, beautifully detailed, wonderful architecture, and that's the cost. Unity Park in Greenville, $38 million. That's approaching that $1 million an acre. Again, it's got significant, some significant architecture, but also was very heavy in the restoration side of things. The Mid-Island tract, what's that going to be for 97 acres? We broke it down into incremental pieces to get to that answer. First, that framework phase, the first part of restoring the water bodies, the bulk of the earthwork, yet creating a usable park at the end of the day, and also usable portions of the undeveloped park while this construction is taking place. It's got trails, playground, the footbridges, activity space for pickup, play, all the utilities, the restoration work, stormwater capacity for stormwater management, for aquifer recharge, for healthier water bodies and the conveyance of water to and through the site, and helping to restore the habitat. What used to be a golf course is no longer going to be such. For that, it's $18 million in that first cost. That includes engineering costs, that includes permitting costs, that also brings along with it an exaggerated schedule because of that permitting and engineering needs to do that work up front. As an add-on cost or enhancements, as we have said, there's an opportunity, as we've heard from the public, for Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in the park, also for a dog park. Those are additive pieces that can happen as part of the base project or be added at any time. But we do need to restore the park first. The next phase, again, is island heritage, again, in no particular sequence. But that includes the community cultural gardens, picnic pavilions, a garden shed, parking and entry, trails, event lawn, any number of activities, community-wide, native islander neighborhoods, which are in fact adjacent, and also Congregation of St. James, and anybody else that happens to be a visitor. That's $6.5 million and could, I think, should be done in conjunction with St. James. A multi-use community building, a place for structured activities, is another $1.5 million. Third is this heart of the tract. This is what I consider the intense people place of the park. Again, it's accessed off of Dillon Road, which is an arterial, and it provides for a sculptural fountain, multi-use community facility and food service, parking, nature play, trails, picnic pavilions, smaller things like bocce courts and chess tables. The Alameda, which is a linear garden, if you will, the gateways into the facility, footbridges, and open lawn for play. That's $17 million. There's a lot of hardscape in all this. Understand this isn't just the green stuff, the plants that go into it, but it's trails, it's concrete, it's furniture, it's pavilions and restrooms. Interactive water feature is another $2 million. That is an enhancement piece. Again, that can be part of a base project, that can be added after the fact. The cultivated landscapes, this whole southeast area of the park along Union Cemetery, There's open areas there. I'll come back to those in a moment, but we've heard from the community the need for a Monet garden, possibly as an enhancement, but Low Country Botanical Gardens, displays of plants, something that is more natural and indigenous to the place, open lawn for play and activities, and demonstrations for some of those garden places. So that's $1.5 million. Add the Monet gardens and the promenades and the fountains off of the parkway. That's another $6 million. That's the linear piece that is perpendicular to the parkway that leads the eye to the heart of the park. The Eco Park, again, is that northeast half of the park. In the first phase, we will have spread some earthwork. We will have done the baking of the cake, as I mentioned. This is where we go back and restore the vegetative quality, removing invasives, encouraging the indigenous plants, and adding to those parking, picnic pavilions, observation decks for the water bodies and for flora and fauna, habitat restoration, boardwalk and canopy walk through the tree canopy. That's a $13 million affair. To add a structure, an eco center, a pavilion, a conditioned space, and also additional paved parking, that's another $3 million of enhancement. So all of that taken together, looking over at the right of this image, those costs taken in total range from $500,000 an acre to $730,000 an acre. So we're well below the cost on a per acre basis. We're 10 times larger than the Low Country Celebration Park, or even below that of Unity Park in Greenville, which is a very similar park. Why is that, you say? Because the majority of this park is left to that natural environment. We've got to restore it first before we turn it over to Mother Nature again. But it is not architecture intensive. There's other improvement opportunities. We know that PSD has got plans for some infrastructure enhancements, which will touch the edge of this tract, also through the Ashmore. There are some off-site improvement needs, we feel. We heard from the community the need for safer pedestrian and bicycle crossing at the surface at both Dillon and Union Cemetery. Dillon Road, along with Union Cemetery, should be improved to have some street side parking, some ease of getting out of an automobile and walking into this park, walking into the space without having to seek out a parking lot. Improved lighting at those intersections and maybe some of those key areas, and improved streetscape landscape. That's not part of those cost numbers that I just went through. Those may very well be part of other infrastructure projects townwide. One part of the recreation program that we did not put in the Mid-Island, but we put in the Ashmore, and that is this 18-hole championship disc golf. There's an existing disc golf facility on near Ashmore, adjacent to it, as a matter of fact. But this is a very friendly way of dealing with the Ashmore tract environmentally. It's got restrictions and concerns relative to the trees, wetlands, water courses, restrictions on development. This is something that can work very friendly with nature. Will provide a parking area, a comfort station, restrooms, and pavilion. And this is a facility that can be woven through the trees without damaging the environment. That's $1.5 million to $2.5 million. So how do we pay for all of that? Typically in a park of this size, in my experience, doing this for almost 40 years, that it isn't necessarily laid at the feet solely of the municipality, in this case the town. Town certainly needs to take ownership and leadership, and there's other opportunities for us to garner private development. I mentioned the Tulsa project, which was almost exclusively funded by private donation. That's an anomaly, to be sure. But there's an opportunity with us to tastefully garner some donor opportunities and sponsorship money to come into the park and to, in fact, buy not just the capital investment of those upfront elements, but also to endow some future operations and maintenance. And I'll talk about that in a second. So it's not for profits. There's a lot of state and federal grants. Lord knows there's a fair amount of federal money floating about out there. Again, the private donations and philanthropic groups and partnerships that can take economic ownership, if you will, of portions of this. Some of those funding opportunities with the cultivated and cultural gardens. There's a number of national organizations that do in fact fund these and operate these such facilities. The Eco Park, many in this audience who have been so involved with with that whole initiative know of some of these organizations of Audubon and the like who have opportunities, and we have opportunities to take advantage of programming of the event garden. We've got a wonderful symphony here. We've got the faith-based organizations that may take advantage of. The general public can also take advantage of some of these spaces, and there is some revenue opportunities there as well. So we think also the local food vendors. I mentioned the significance of the Gullah Geechee culture and history of the place. We've got an opportunity within this park to showcase that culture. Local organizations for events. There's revenue sharing for any number of activities that may happen in the park. But keep in mind, this is still under strict town control, town operation, but there are smarter ways of funding some of these opportunities. And there's also these pure partnerships for the park as a whole. Healthcare partnering with all the wellness programs that can happen, park conservancy districts, and the like. So if you build it, you must maintain it, as the adage goes. We want to bring to everyone's attention that as we bring on 97 acres over time of what I think is best-in-class park for a best-in-class community, we've got to be cognizant that we've got to have dedicated staff and resources to maintain it and operate it. This town does a tremendous job with its park system. We have tremendous parks that are extremely well maintained. And I would think that nothing different would happen here, but we need to be cognizant as we put on capital expenditure, we've got to operate and maintain it. Park security as a whole is important in society, and certainly these days, is there a park ambassador corps that we may instigate? Is this public safety director of the town, along with the sheriff's department, able and capable and sufficient to ensure security here? That's something that is going to have to be solved long term. Also the educational programs. This is a place certainly for all of us to enjoy, but this is also a place to engage the school system, not just on the island, but off as well, to educate not only school-age children, but us adults for continued learning throughout our lifetimes. So a lot of folks have asked us, well, what's this park name? Well, we've heretofore have called it the Mid-Island Tract because it's a tract and it's in the Mid-Island. But I doubt that that's the romantic name that we want to place on this. There's so much history and culture, not just on the island, but specifically in this district. What is that proper name? Not for me to determine unless someone tells me to. So what we think an approach to naming this is to commit to a public process, because this is a place for the public and the public should have a say in this. But to have it in fact curated or directed by someone who's in the branding business, engage the public to help select the name, educate those those folks, those participants into what's the history of the place, tell the story of the park, establish some guidelines as to how we're going to select that park name, engage the public through workshops, take their comments, and then curate those names and suggestions for consideration by town council. Now, that's one process. Town council is well within their rights to go name this as they see fit, and that happens all of the time. So we're just put this forth for council consideration that this may be a more agreeable process. So all in, what we're suggesting is that at the end of this, Ashmore working with the Mid-Island Tract, and as we grow into our britches, as they say, with phased development, this will be a best-in-class park at the center of the island, Mid-Island District. It is the central park for, I think, the town of Hilton Head, plain and simple. Our next steps will be, we're here on the 14th of September. Thank you very much for your time. We go to the Parks and Recreation Commission for briefing in early October. Back here, the 1st of November for consideration by council for adoption of not just this vision plan, this concept plan, but for phase 1 of the Mid-Island Tract along with the district plan as a whole. I think then it's time for celebration. All the hard work that the town and the constituency has done to get to this place and to celebrate the fact that this is going to be a magnificent place in a magnificent town. Council will need, along with staff, establish a budget and a schedule. It then goes into final design, a lot of engineering, permitting, construction drawings, specifications for that phase 1 development, out for bidding, get contractor or contractors under agreement to the town, start that construction process, and away we go. And once phase 1 is over, depending on how funding and the political will goes, then we just continue to take another bite. I think that's it. With that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, and can I provide some clarification relative to the budget? So we have $5.2 million that town council approved in FY23. So provided you approve the master plan in November, we're ready we have the funding to move on into that detailed design that Brian mentioned so that we can move toward bringing conversation in part of FY24 budgeting about what you might want phase 1 to be and how you might want to pay for that. But we'll be ready to go on and move in to that detailed design based on the funding that you've already approved for the project. And then the project celebration, like Brian said, there's been a lot of effort. I know when we started talking last year, we said we were going to have groundbreaking and a shovel in the ground and start, and we all realized how much time this took and how much effort we needed to put into it with the community and with council. And so we're not at that point, but it will be time to say, as a group, we've come up with a plan that's best in class, that's right for our community, and celebrate that as we move into that detailed design and being able to put that shovel in the ground. So just wanted to add that for context.
Brian, members of the council first. Tom?
One question, Brian. You didn't mention where you planted the money tree.
Oh, the mayor told me that was in your backyard, Tom, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Thank you. And as always, I'm going to say what I always do. This is more than best in class. This is world class. This is an exceptional opportunity to provide and secure and preserve for the future 97 acres in Park State. And because of that, I think we are on the right track. A point to that, the overdevelopment, if we were not to preserve and protect this land, I don't know if you read the paper. I think it came in yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. But on Jonesville Road, as we know, there's a tremendous amount of development going on. And in the paper, just within the last day or so, there's a horse farm. There's a place where children go and adults go to ride horses and to learn about horses and to enjoy our natural environment. They've been given 60 days eviction notice to move the horses because there's a new development going in that space. So when we think about Hilton Head and development and keeping and maintaining our island, not just our brand, but who we are, we need to think about what's happening down the roads, in neighborhoods, and we need to take the time to appreciate that we have this opportunity to secure this land in a park-like state for the rest of time. Thank you.
David?
I don't have a lot to add because I think you're heading in a great direction. Obviously, it's a very ambitious program that you've laid out. I think it's makes sense for the community. I think the residents of the community will take advantage of it. I think it will be attractive to visitors as well. But in the context of today's conversations, if this program is worth $70 million in expense to the community, and it creates a certain amount of benefit to the community, is it more important than workforce housing, community housing, or less important? And if this is $70 million, do we have $70 million on the side for housing? Rhetorical question, obviously, but I'm just putting it out there that we have priority decisions, and we as a council have to understand where our investment might do the most good for the community. But I'm in full support of this program. Thank you.
Bill? I don't think this is a binary decision, workforce or this. I think we have to do both, and that's going to force some very sensitive cash flow complementation to make this work. This does have, one key feature is that this has widespread appeal for children, for seniors, and everyone in between. Also, widespread appeal for our residents and our visitors. So I think just by the inherent design of this park, it is going to be a substantive long-term attraction for this community, and something, we're always looking for the competitive advantage. And we do have a lot of things here that make us competitive. This will put us a step ahead. So I encourage that from a capital financing standpoint, it's going to be tricky. The infrastructure, the sunken cost in phase one is going to be a big nut. And without any revenues coming in. And we may have to do something that's tangible before we are able to tap into the largesse of the donor community. And I think that's going to be tricky. But I'm totally in favor of continuing to proceed. It makes a true statement about who we are, and it certainly does enhance our brand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am very excited about this project. I think the concepts that we are seeing coming from our experts, Eco Park, Culture Gardens, these other features, they ring true to our image of ourselves, to our island character, as my good friend David focuses on many times. And that is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing here. Last night, I sat in with Jennifer and the MKSK team in a public meeting at Port Royal. I didn't know what to expect coming out of that. I know that my friends in Port Royal have strong opinions about things, and that's valid. That's the way it should be. But I didn't hear criticism of the park or the concepts of the park as it was presented. I did hear concern about the expense. We didn't receive last night the detailed breakdown of the expenses that we've seen here today, but I think our friends in Port Royal and further across the community are right to be concerned about the revenue, expense that it's going to cost to develop this project. And that makes me think that it's going to be a long-term project. And that's all right. I hope I see it completed, but that remains to be seen. But Brian and Andrew and your team, thank you for outstanding concepts that really speak to us in this community. As I understand it, something else we're going to be doing on November the 1st is approving the phase 1, or at least that's on the agenda. And as I understand it, phase 1 is the initial engineering and correction of the water flows and that sort of thing, getting it to where it can become a park later on. So I look forward to that. We've got a lot of work to do in this and other things, and I look forward to being part of that team. Thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, thank you. Great work. I am going to, I guess, relate this to our previous conversation. Councilman Ains and Councilman Hawkins have kind of touched on this, but $70 million, who knows what that looks like long term. But we have decided that doing this will yield some type of return on investment to our community, particularly with the idea of us looking for redevelopment in the Mid-Island Initiative area, okay? And we've already got $5 million spent, basically. We're gonna move forward, right? If we say yes, the beginning of November. But it does beg the question, why is this so easy, right? But it has no difference when it comes to our investment strategies, our building infrastructure for future development, for building community. In my mind, it has no difference. The only difference is there's a line item, there's money there, and we're gonna move forward. We didn't referenda this to get to this point, and it's to be determined if we will referenda to get to completion. So although the two different conversations, in my mind, the level of the conversations are the same. So I just want to make that point as far as being relative. So at this point, I think that Brian and his team have done a great job with laying this out. I'm glad that there are numbers now associated with it. The only question I'd ask is between now and November, I'm glad that the plan is being shown here in front of the public today, but is there an opportunity for this presentation to be public on the website or wherever along the way so that we can start to get feedback before making a decision at the beginning of November?
Brian's taking a show on the road like he's done in the past.
Okay, that's fine.
Right?
Okay, good. But I think having it somewhere on our website helps also for those that are not going to be in attendance we'll just be able to see it, okay? But otherwise, great job, guys. I appreciate the hard work that's been put into this thus far.
Questions by the community? None? Mr. Lennox.
Mark, I think I know the answer to this, but is there any latitude in the proposed 1% sales tax for green space for our use to be in the construction of this park?
It's a great question. Easy answer is I don't know yet. I'll research it. I know that Senator Davis wants to come and talk with town council about the green space provisions or code proposed on the ballot for November with Beaufort County. So perhaps he can help us with some of those answers.
You know when he's coming, Mark?
No, I'd have to check his schedule. Perhaps he can come as early as September 20th, our next meeting, if he can make it. Otherwise, soon thereafter. I suggest sooner than later.
Important to have that answer.
Yes.
That's a great question.
I'll invite him, and I see some head nods in the crowd there too. I'll invite him for the September 20 agenda, and if he can make it, I'll let you know and put it on the agenda.
Brian, you did exactly what we asked you to do, and I thank you very, very much. With that, I'll call the meeting to an end. Meeting adjourned. Mayor.